Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In this episode of the .NET Show, I'm going to show you how you can create and access a backend service using gRPC from a MAUI front end. gRPC is a free open source framework for doing remote procedure calls, originally developed by Google and widely adopted by just about every client and server platform, including .NET. Interestingly, James Newton King, the creator of Newtonsoft JSON, arguably the most widely used JSON library, and now a Microsoft engineer, blogs often about Microsoft's support for gRPC. In fact, much of Microsoft's gRPC documentation is written in part by James. People use gRPC because it's more performant than standard JSON over HTTP served up by REST endpoints. gRPC also requires much less ceremony. And serialization issues just don't exist for the most part. In fact, all the serialization and deserialization is done by generated code you'll never even see. MAUI does gRPC, and so do I. And it's all coming right up on the .NET Show. So I'm going to start today with a new .NET MAUI app. I'm using Visual Studio 2022, the latest preview. And as you can see, it's right now January 10th, 2022. So it's the latest one. And it'll be called gRPC Demo. Now I'm going to select Windows as my target. I don't have anything else connected over here. And right away, I've gotten in the habit of building before I run. All right, let's just make sure everything works. Hello world. Click. Counter goes up. Seems to work. Okay. Now the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of purple. Got nothing against purple. I just don't want it in my demo. So I've opened app.xaml. This is where the default colors get set and styles and all that. So I'm going to change the primary color to black. Now also look at the button style. I'm going to set the background color instead of black, the primary color. Make it gray. Let's make it green. What the heck? Let's just make sure it looks okay. Sure, that looks fine. Now, this is a gRPC demo, and this is just the client side, right? This is the Windows app, the MAUI app. So let me add all the packages that I need for gRPC. So I'm going to double click on the project to pull up the CSproj file, and we'll just paste these right here. So we're going to get Google Protobuf, grpc.net.client. Now, if you saw Blazor Train, you recognize that this was grpc.net.client.web. Well, we're not web, we're a client, so that's why we're using this version. And also gRPC tools. Okay, now we're going to add a server. Well, what kind of server? Well, an ASP.NET Core web server. Just an empty ASP.NET Core server project. That's what we're going to add. There it is right there. ASP.NET Core empty. That's going to be called gRPC server. Now I'll double click on there to get the CSproj file. And we'll add the NuGet packages we need on the server. Now I'm going to add a third project, a shared project that will contain the proto files. Think of this as where the models are. We'll call it gRPC shared. And this is going to be a class library. I'm going to get rid of class1.cs right away, because I don't need that. But before we start adding a proto file or any of that stuff, let's give it the packages that it needs. There we have pretty much the same packages that we have on the client side. Now I'm going to add a proto file to gRPC shared. And I've created this before. Unfortunately, Visual Studio doesn't allow you to right-click Add Proto, or it isn't allowing me to do that. So I created the proto file in a text editor. I'm just going to drop it in. So you can think of this as a definition of classes, but it's in a proto language, which gets generated into whatever your base language is Ours is C#. The good thing about protobuf and about gRPC is that this generic language is used by every single platform. It's always the same. So they had to distill it down to what makes sense to programmers on every platform. So let's just look at person here. So this is defining a person class, and we have different variable types. And these are variable types that will translate to every kind of language. So here's a 32-bit integer, ID. Talk about the numbers in a second. We have first name, last name strings, a bio string, and a photo URL. The numbers are actually how these things are identified. So rather than using JSON, where everything is this big long string, protobuf packs all of this data into a series of bytes. And these numbers are used to identify the values. Now, this defines a service, people. And these are the endpoints. Remote procedure calls. Here's one, get all. And it takes a get all people request, which has nothing in it. What's that all about? Well, the reason that we need it is to satisfy the protocol. So every remote procedure call accepts a message as a request and returns a message as a request. So you see, people reply is what this service get all, this procedure, returns. And then instead of defining an array or a list or whatever, because we have to support all different languages, we're just boiling it down to the essence of it. Yes, it's not an array, it's not a list, because they're called different things on different platforms. It's a repeated person. So it turns out that this is an array, but when you're defining it in the proto file, you say repeated person. People equals 1. So you don't have to send anything, but you do have to have a message when you make a request. Now let's go down to the last one, get person by ID. So this takes a get person by ID request, which is this message here, right? And the only thing that it has is one property, ID, and that's 1. But it returns a person, a single person, not a people reply, but just a single person. We don't need anything else around it. So for the stream, like get all, it's going to return a bunch of persons, but one at a time. So for that syntax, I use stream person, a stream of persons, and that's it. Now up the top, you have the C# namespace, gRPC shared, the package, which just name it the same as the service, people package. And then the syntax, we're using proto 3. This is the third version of protobuf. That's all you need. So we're going to leave that there. But now that I have a proto file, I'm going to go back to the CS proj, and I need to add a couple of things here. The Visual Studio doesn't add automatically. All right, let's look at these. Person.cs gets generated. And I've found that sometimes if you don't have this in here and you don't remove it if you see it, you won't be able to compile. And just to be sure, I put a remove person.cs in there. This right here, protobuf include equals people.proto. Without this, the rest of the code that relies on the generated person and the people service and all that won't be able to see it. So it's a good idea right now to just build this shared project so that everything will get generated. Now, we have all these projects here, but they can't see each other. So I'm going to add a reference from gRPC demo to gRPC shared, and also from gRPC server to gRPC shared. Now, because I want to run the server and the client, I'm going to open the solution properties and go to multiple startup projects. And I'm going to select start for gRPC demo and gRPC server. That way, both of these projects will run when I press F5. All right, now we have to have some data to retrieve. So I've created a JSON file called people.json. I'm going to add it to the server. And there it is. Now, I know you can't read it, but this is 5,000 person records that have been serialized into a JSON file, into an array. All right, so we're going to start configuration on gRPC server. Let's open program CS, and I'm going to replace this. So we've added gRPC as a service right there. We're going to add a persons manager once we create it as a singleton. And we're also going to map the gRPC service people service. So this we're going to create in C# to implement that service contract. So let's go create these now. I'm going to add a data folder. First, I'll create the persons manager. Now the persons manager is very simple. I've got a nullable list of person called people. That's public. And in the constructor, I'm reading in people.json and deserializing that to people. All right, now let's create our gRPC service. Okay, let's dive into this. So I'm overriding people.peoplebase. Where did that come from? Well, our shared project generates all this stuff when we build it, right? We've got a persons manager that's injected into people service. Here's my get all. So if I just want to simply return a people reply, which is that list of 5,000 person objects, this is the syntax. I'm overriding task of people reply, get all, my people request, and my server call context. Need that as well. So here's my reply. I'm creating a new people reply, and to the people, I'm adding my persons manager people and returning the task from that result, and Bob's your uncle. Now we'll leave the stream for a second. We'll go down to get person by ID. All right, so you see this is a familiar pattern here. Public override task of whatever you're returning. The name as defined by the service. I can't change this or else it won't know what to do, because in the base class, this is a virtual method. Get person by ID request and the server call context. So I'm pulling that person object out of people. And yes, I know I'm not checking for nulls. I'm not doing a lot of stuff, but I want this demo to be absolutely clear about gRPC. That's why I'm not mucking it up with a lot of other stuff. Okay, now let's look at get all stream. So we're overriding async task get all stream. Here's my request. Now we have this additional argument, iServer stream writer of whatever we're returning, response stream. You can call it whatever you want, but this is your variable. This is your stream that you write to, and then the context. So here we're retrieving the list, and then we go through that list, and we await writing asynchronously to the response stream, one at a time. And this is analogous to doing a yield return. We pull one of the persons out, we write it to the response stream, which goes back to the client. That's how we do streaming in gRPC. All right, now I save everything, and if I go back to program, you see these guys are happy now. Okay, on to the client. We're going to start with MAUI program.cs. So rather than program.cs, it's called MAUI program.cs, but it does the same stuff. We have a builder, and it should be a familiar syntax to you now. Poof. All right, let's look at this. So I've got a base address. Now this is the address of the server, and that's not correct. It was in the last demo, but not in this demo. So you can find that in the server project under properties, launch settings JSON, and right down here, localhost 7216. Now I'm not covering security yet, because in the world of MAUI, security and the implementation of doing auth is changing, and there's some new stuff coming down the pike. And so I'm waiting for that before I start doing auth. So there we go. Now we have our base address. Now we're adding a new scoped service, and I'm getting that from an anonymous method where I'm taking the base address, making a URI. I'm getting a gRPC channel from that address, and then I'm creating a new people client, passing in that channel. And yes, people client is automatically generated by gRPC. So now, because this is a scoped service that's been added to my startup here, I can inject that into whatever I want. All right, let's go to main page XAML. And we're going to change this up a little bit. So here at the top, I've changed the label to gRPC demo. The next label I have as our display label. They called it counter label. I'll just keep that name. This is where messages get displayed. And now I've got a button to retrieve a random record. So that get person by ID. So let's look at the code behind here. Now you're going to have to put up with some squiggles for a minute. This is a preview version of Visual Studio, and some things aren't quite baked yet, but I'll show you how to get rid of those squiggles in just a second. So check this out. I'm injecting a people client into main page, and I'm going to use that to go get a random record. So my on counter clicked, I'm leaving that the same name, remember. I'm getting a randomizer, and I'm pulling out a random ID, and then I'm creating a new get person by ID request in the ID, and you'll notice that the semantics have created Pascal casing now for the names of my variables, whereas in the proto file, they're lowercase. All right, so now I'm awaiting get person by ID async on the people client, getting a person back, and if it's not null, I'm going to display the ID, the first name, and the last name in that counter label text. I'm also using the semantic screen reader announce, just the way they do in the demo, the default demo that's in the template. I don't really need to know what this does yet, but they did it, so I'm going to do it. All right, now, how do we get this called? What calls this? What creates this? Can I just pull this out of thin air? Well, no, turns out you can't. Let's go to app XAML CS and see how we're creating a new main page right here. Well, right there, we need to pass in the people client. But here in app, we can inject it out of thin air because this is the first thing that runs. So the system will inject it to us. We will inject it to main page. Now, I told you I would fix all of these squiggles. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to close Visual Studio and open it again. Ah, that's better. Now, let's run it. I'm going to minimize this guy so we don't see a solid field of white here. Now let's try it, retrieving a random record. Boom. Now the first time you run it, it's going to take some time because that JSON file has to load up. But the second time, boom, boom. And of course, we can put a breakpoint in people service, get person by ID, right there. Boom. Yes. So as you can see, this is working very much like an API layer, except that there's much less ceremony. And it turns out it's more performant and more scalable. All right, now let's use that stream to return a list of 5,000 person objects. Yes, I know. Don't do this at home. This is a demo. Don't write me. It's okay. It's going to be fine, really. All right, let's start by going to main page XAML CS. We're going to need some new things here. Let's start at the top. So I've added this new observable collection of person called people, and I have a backing field for it. And my getter just returns the backing field, but my setter also calls on property changed. Where'd I get that? Oh yeah, I notify property changed. Now I know this is an older, outdated way to do binding. I know that, but it's also the easiest. So I don't want let binding get in the way of you understanding how this stuff works. So in the real world, I'd use a view model like I did with the DNR mobile app, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to keep it as simple as possible. So we have people. Anytime we change people, the notify property changed gets called and the UI will update. Now I've set binding context to this very simply so that the form can be bound to this code and we can use people as a resource to bind to. So here's the code that handles the button click event that we're going to wire up. gRPC stream button clicked, and you have to use the signature for a button click. I'm going to clear my observable collection. I'm going to update my counter label to loading, put in a little delay there in case we need that. Not actually sure if we do. I'm going to time everything. So I've got a start time, which is now, and this is how we're calling the stream. We need to get a call, something that we can call and await. So I'm saying using var call, whatever we call it, equals people client get all stream with a new get all people request. Remember, there's nothing in that, so just a new get all people request is enough. And now we iterate through the response stream. And this is the syntax: while await call.response stream move next. And I'm passing this token in here. This is a cancellation token. I'm going to do a whole show on cancellation tokens at a later time. So now we're adding the person to the list, but we're not refreshing the UI yet. We're only going to refresh the UI once after 20 people have been retrieved, and then again after every 100 persons have been retrieved. So that's what this code does. And then I show the elapsed time at the end. All right, let's update the UI. Now there's a few things that I did at the top here. Well, one really. I added this XML namespace local so that we could access the code inside. And I've added a button to retrieve 5,000 records as a stream. I know. And now I have a collection view. I'm setting the item source to binding people. You remember what we did is we created a public people observable collection. So that is now our item source. And in the data template for the collection view item template for every item, we have a stack layout with two labels. It's a horizontal stack layout. So first name and last name. We just used that simple binding syntax for that. And that is it. Let's try it. All right, here we go. Whoa, did you see that? So it returned 5,000 records in 2.6 seconds, but the initial 20 came in 720 milliseconds. But that was the first time we loaded it. Let's see what happens the second time. In particular, watch this. Boom. Holy crap, that was fast. The initial 20 in 19, well, let's just call it 20 milliseconds. So that's like one item per millisecond. And you saw how fast it loaded up. Yeah, 1.4 seconds for the whole 5,000. Now, of course, when you put the internet in between, things get a little bit slower. However, it's still going to be wicked fast for your user to see the data that they want to see immediately. And they can't scroll down fast enough to get to the 5,000th record. But they're all there. All right, the last demo I want to do is to show how we can send a person object as well as just a simple int. To do that, we start at the proto level. I've added a special request message for getting a stream that passes a person. So now getAllStream, rather than taking a getAllPeople request, takes a getAllPeople stream request and returns the same thing. So just by doing this and building it, now when we go to our people service, it's going to expect this to be a get all people stream request. And that's exactly what it's complaining about. So I changed that to get all people stream. Everything else works the same. Now let's just have some code that we can break on to read that person. Put a breakpoint right there. All right, now we need to change not the UI, because the UI is going to be the same, but the code behind in main page XAML. So at the top, I've got a person variable, received person. And now when we get just our person by ID, instead of creating a special local person object, I'm just using received person. So we have to do this first. We have to get a random person first. I've got that. Now, when I stream, I'm going to create a new get all people stream request and set the person to received person. And that's it. And remember, we have our breakpoint in the service. All right, so the first thing we have to do is retrieve that random record. All right, good. Now when we retrieve the stream, boom, we've got this received person. You can see the first name is Enim, the last name is Telus, and the ID is 2733. Good, huh? Well, that is my demo. I hope that you learned something about gRPC. There's a lot more to know about gRPC, but I wanted to show you the dramatic results that you can get with gRPC and streaming with MAUI. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Please visit blazertrain.com and the .NETshow.com for more great content.